Hello everybody, I'm Colin D. Ellis and welcome to the Culture and Coffee podcast, where every episode I discuss a new topic of workplace culture and provide some insights and some practical things for you to do. Don't forget to like, subscribe and to share with people who you may think would be interested. Okay, let's get on with today's episode. Hello everybody, it's Colin here. Welcome to another episode of the Culture and Coffee podcast. Today's coffee is from Watch House. That's the name of the people that produce the coffee, which is from Costa Rica, with notes of pineapple, white grape and molasses. And it's a cute, for those of you watching the video, it's a really cute kind of little box with the coffee inside it, which I bought in a great cafe opposite Hampstead Heath on a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful autumn, not just beautiful, but beautiful autumn day in London, which kind of makes you forget when the weather's truly terrible. Can't beat London on days like this. Can't beat London. Anyway, delicious coffee, it really is. Today's session is all about bullying. Now, what made me want to record this session was two reports that appeared in the media in different parts of the world last week. The first was from Sky News, which reported on the NHS staff survey, where 26,000 staff had been the victim of assault, touching, sexualized or inappropriate conversation or jokes from colleagues. 26,000 people, all right, have been affected by that. And then the next one was from media in Australia, who were reporting on Nine Entertainment Group, who have had a very public toxic culture, as is the way these days. And I don't know why senior leaders are not taking this seriously. There's still this almost reluctance to accept that the world has changed and that, culture is in the spotlight and the media are interested. Anyway, the story's been going on for a while. The report was finally produced, finally made public last week. And in it, 49% of all staff, said they'd experienced bullying, discrimination or harassment. So half of staff had said they'd been bullied, discriminated against or harassed. It's just absolutely appalling statistics. So I thought, well, I think I should talk about this. I think I should talk about what bullying is, because maybe there's some people that don't know. Maybe there's some people that haven't quite caught on. And for those of you who are listening, as I did with my book, DETOX Your Culture, one of the first kind of sections in there was, are you the problem? Because I think sometimes people aren't always aware of their behavior. So listen, we'll talk about some of these things. And I don't for 1 minute think that some people do it deliberately. I think some people do, but I think others just kind of lack self-awareness and maybe don't think about the consequences of their actions. So in this session, I'm going to talk about bullying. I'm going to talk about what it is, and then I'm going to talk about the effects that bullying has on people, just in case you're not aware of that, and then kind of the things that you can do to actually address bullying, which is often the hardest thing to do. I dedicated my book. I put this on LinkedIn last week, actually. My new book, DETOX Your Culture, was dedicated to anybody who suffered at the hands of anybody in the workplace. Because that my main motivation for writing the book was to make people aware that toxic culture, can cause untold harm, but it doesn't have to be inevitable. There's so many things that you can do. And I was speaking to a senior leader earlier today who loved the book. Obviously, if she'd have hated it, there's no way I would have brought that up. Yeah, I was speaking to a senior leader today, hated the book, and that's what she wanted to tell me. No, she loved the book. And she said there were so many things in there that she hadn't even thought of. And I think that's the thing, because we don't teach people how to build culture. We don't teach people how not to bully people. It sounds ridiculous, but we don't. We're very good at sending people on courses, online courses. In fact, I spoke to someone very first thing this morning who was talking about a DEI course that he did online. And he said he just clicked through it just to tick the box. I was like, yeah, that's the thing with these online programs. When actually there is, and he said this, there's lots of gold in there. There's lots of, really great information. Of course there is, but we teach it wrong. We almost teach it to get it over with rather than to inform people. And so I do think there are some people who are bullies and they just haven't got a clue that they are. And the way that you'll explain it to yourself sometimes is like they're really good people. I don't know why they're behaving like that. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But there are some just really bad people. Like there's just some really, really bad people who should be fired. And so I'll talk a little bit about taking action. So let's kind of define what bullying is. So what is bullying? So I think the thing about bullying is it might be kind of a regular pattern of behavior. It might be something that happens all of the time. Or it could be a one-off incident. I think there are some people that think that bullying only happens over a period of time. It can just be one thing. It can just be one thing, which I'll talk about. It can happen face to face, virtually, emails, social media, phone calls. It can happen in all of those places, right? There's nowhere that bullying can't happen. Any kind of online, it can happen online. And we seem to think that the external social media is the place where it can happen, but also it's internal social media as well that it can happen. And there have been instances where senior leaders have followed their employees on Instagram and all this kind of stuff. Confederation of British Industry, that happened there. I got asked about that on a podcast recently. I'm like, and they was like, what should a senior leader think about when they're following people on social media? I was like, they should be thinking about not following employees on social media unless they're really, really, really good friends and socialize outside of work. Otherwise, seriously, what? Just like, no. Bullying can happen in working hours, but also outside of working hours. Sometimes at events, and we're, as I'm recording this, it's mid-October and we're almost getting to silly season with end of year / Christmas parties. So it can happen outside of work. And it's not always obvious. It's not always obvious. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't. So what is it? Well, it's criticism. And one of my pet peeves used to be as an employee and as a manager is this whole concept of constructive criticism. Now, you can provide feedback, that's fine. And the feedback it's got to enhance somebody's self-awareness, and it's got to be action-based so that they can do something about it. But constructive criticism is still criticism. You're still criticizing another person. So, criticism is bullying. Humiliation is bullying in whatever way. And I still think there are some people who haven't yet caught up with the times, talk a little bit about that, who still see, kind of taking the piss as fair game. And, that's the whole, stop being so touchy. It was just a joke. The whole just a joke thing. Right? If you humiliate someone in any way, shape, or form, it's not a joke. You can joke a lot in really, really well-defined cultures where you've agreed the behaviors that are applicable to your group and what's acceptable and what's not. Then joking is absolutely fine. I've talked about this in the past with banter. Banter's absolutely fine, providing that the foundational culture exists. And that means that there's been a widespread agreement on what we can and can't say. All right. Otherwise, people can be humiliated by these so-called jokes. And often when people say it was just a joke, it's never funny. It's never funny. Social exclusion. Now, that's not an excuse for you to ask to be invited to every meeting. There's some people like that, right? They're like, oh, invite me to everything. Like, So no. If it's of no value to you and no value to the meter, the answer's no. But people can sometimes be deliberately excluded, and definitely think that that's one thing as managers quite often is done unconsciously. They're not thinking, who do I need, who can add value, how will they feel, all of these kinds of things, right? So social exclusion from meetings. Same with social events. Now I had some people who I've managed over the years who were extreme introverts, and kind of socializing. I don't mean drinking. Sometimes it was drink, but sometimes it wasn't. Socializing just wasn't their thing. Now, I expected the internal socializing. So this would be things like wishing the team happy birthday. My expectation was every team member would partake in those kind of events where it's on work time. But outside of time, they didn't want to go, and that's fine. But they were still asked. We never, and I made sure that everyone was saying, never got to the point where we didn't ask them. And actually, more often than not, what happened is they started to come because they didn't want to miss out. But we didn't make them feel like that. They were always invited. So, kind of excluding people from social events, again, consciously or unconsciously, can be considered bullying. Micromanagement as one of the biggest areas of bullying. Now, micromanagement happens when the manager wants to be told every single thing. Now, what I often hear is they need me to do that. Now, if they've asked you to micromanage them, perfectly fine, right? And I'll talk towards the end about allegations of bullying that are bullying. It's important that we have the balance. But micromanagement, where you just insist on every detail, insist on being copied into every email. And that's something that, again, unconscious, can you copy me into that? Can you copy me into that? Can you copy me into that? Can be considered bullying because you're like, well, you're checking up on everything. Checking. Every decision has to go through me. Checking. So micromanagement is one of the biggest areas when people are really, really pedantic, really, really picky about things. Now, of course, there's a certain level of equality applied to certain things, but often there's just not an adult approach taken. Like if there's a typo in an email and it's just going to one person, that person's in the team, it's really no big deal. Monitoring. And now this is something I wrote about recently because there's a consulting firm here in London who are going to monitor when their staff are in the office and when they're not in the office. And that's bullying as well. So it's really interesting. I'm not sure that they've wholly considered that, is wanting to know where people are at all times can be considered bullying. And there have been cases taken to court where people felt threatened by the fact that that they were being monitored by their employer. And it's the same with online tools where, if you're away, if it shows you're away for 2 hours, the manager wants to know. I got asked about that on a podcast recently, actually. They said, what should employees do? And I said, how is it the manager's got so much time in their hand they're able to monitor their employees in that way? Like, what are they doing? Have they not got enough work? Either that or they're really, really bad at setting and holding people to expectations. That's the answer to that conundrum. Then you've got the more extreme stuff. You've got verbal abuse. You've got verbal threats. You've got any kind of physical contact in work. No, definitely not. Now that can be considered harassment, sexual or otherwise, right? If physical contact, and I spoke at a conference recently, and what would your advice be? Because they were talking about hugging. I was like, my advice would be no physical contact. Like that would, now if you're really close as a team, been working together, you've got an agreed way of behaving, fine, that's your cultural norm. Otherwise, no. Sabotage of work, deliberate sabotage of work. So that's considered bullying. Not giving people the resources that they need. Sometimes it's not giving them the people that they need to get the job done. And then the last one is just so childish, and yet I see it and hear about it time and time again. Gossip and rumor, and everybody does it. If even once last week, or maybe this week as you're listening to the podcast or this session, if even once you've said something bad about behind someone's back about someone else, then you're complicit. And that's the kind of thing that I really want people to be aware about. It's not considered bullying when you say good things behind people's back. So do that. Do that. And if you haven't got, it's that classic thing your parents told you, hopefully they told your parents or your guardians, is if you haven't got anything nice to say, don't say it at all. Right? If you've got beef with somebody, then, talk to someone who can do something about it. So all of these things are considered to be bullying. And the whole, well, you can't say anything these days, Colin, can you? You can't do anything these days, Colin. Oh, you have to be so careful these days, As comedian Stuart Lee does a great bit on these days. And yeah, these days you can't. These days you have to think. These days you have to be cognizant of your actions, your words, your communication style. These days you have to recognize that the world is very different than the world that you grew up in. And these days, here we go again, is the world changes probably every 6 months. And so it's really incumbent upon every employee to educate themselves. It's incumbent upon every HR department to educate managers. I've talked about this before, is we don't train managers on how to be managers. HR should be investing in this every year. The organizations that will have the best cultures are the ones that train their managers how to be managers in a contemporary way and put time, thought, effort, and money into that. Sending people on an online course ain't going to do it. The best learning is still done face-to-face in person unless it's impossible to do so. And if you do it virtually, then there has to be some kind of accountability to make sure that they put it into action. So that's what bullying is. What are the effects on people? Well, you'll be surprised to learn it has a significant impact on people's mental health, which, kind of generates all kinds of psychological, physiological impacts. So stress, anxiety, depression, and all of the things that those things lead to, like from very minor things like headaches, migraines, loss of sleep, to serious illness. One of the things I talk about in the book is that if you work in a toxic culture for a long time, and that might mean you're being bullied for that period of time, you are 35 to 55% more likely to contract a serious illness because of the stress, the strain, the anxiety. And of course, bullying also leads to suicide. Really, I really don't think people think enough about the consequence of the actions, their behavior, the way that they treat people. Now, the way that bullying shows itself is in the changed behavior of employees. And so it's always something to look out for. Higher absenteeism. All right. There will be gossip because that's the nature of work. And if it's all about the same individual and their behaviors, then there's a good chance that individual is a bully. High rates of turnover, but turnover of good people. Because this is not the good old days where people used to stay in a job 15, 20 years. That generation of people is dying out. Millennials, Gen Z, usually 3 to 5 years, then they move on. Unless they're working in a really great culture, in which case they're happy to stay with the organization, providing that you provide them with opportunities. Remember, they've been raised differently. They've been raised to expect advancement in lieu of good work. They're not going to sit around and wait for 10 years to be next, like many organizations still have. And of course, if you're monitoring things like productivity, most organizations don't, but if you're monitoring things like productivity, you'll notice a dip. And of course, it'll show itself in the engagement survey, and people will actually write down. If it's anonymous, they'll write down. If it's not anonymous and it feels safe to be able to record it, then they'll do that. But for most people. If it's anonymous, they'll let you know. So what can you do? All right, let's round this up. What can you do? So if you're on the receiving end of bullying, and I sincerely hope you're not, it happened to me once and I dealt with it. So the first thing that you can do is document everything. Write every single thing down, every single interaction. If it's done via email, save those emails. This might, I don't know, it might, when you're listening to this or watching this, it might feel quite draconian. But like, if you feel that you're the victim of bullying, you need to capture everything. You need to build a case. Unfortunately, I'd love the default for organizations to immediately take you seriously. That's not my experience, to be honest. You have to be able to provide proof, anecdotal proof. Now, I don't mean gather a gang up and say, right, we and all of these people, everybody has to keep their own kind of documentation around bullying. So make sure you write everything down, including how you feel. And yes, there are case studies, recent cases in the last 2 years of where employees have sued the organizations and won for emotional harm. And again, I'm not trying to generate litigation. What I'd actually like is for people to let people know that they're actual bullies, because they probably don't know. That's the first thing. The second thing is to practice assertive communication. That's how I dealt with my issue with bullying. My boss was under pressure from his boss, who was a bully. And then my boss tried to bully his team. He kind of met his match. There was a team of 6 of us. He met his match with 3 of us who were just like, so absolutely not. But it's a bit of a shock when it happens, particularly as I was, I'd been a senior leader for quite a while there. And so this exists at all levels of the organization. Don't think it's just bosses, with frontline employees. There are senior leaders getting bullied by CEOs. I know a couple. And they keep passing it off. Oh, that's just who he is. That's just who he is. You get used to him. I don't think so. So, there are a number of techniques that you can practice to become more assertive. I think in line with that, you can also use things like meditation techniques to help you to de-stress, to help you manage the anxiety. And this is just a sideline, really, of the action. But you can do things like these when you're writing stuff down to help with a little bit with the resilience. Yeah. The third thing is that report the individual to HR or to management, right? HR, unfortunately, just aren't as effective as they should be. And it feels like a big brush to tar everybody with. And I wrote about HR recently. It was a really popular blog because they've just got it wrong along the way, and they've become all about process, and they've forgotten about the people side of the really important people sides of things. And of course, I don't mean everybody. I just mean most HR. Terrible. Everyone at HR is going to hate this and turn it off. But I think it's the profession. Listen, I'm equally as critical as project management profession, which was my old professional, which has become all about certification. That's what it's become all about, rather than building a team, building a plan, and just executing really, really well. Build a plan, build a team, build a plan, deliver the project. And so that's gone off the rails. And I think HR too, they've kind of lost sight of the fact that they are responsible for the well-being of all employees, not protecting leadership. If you don't feel that you can go to HR or management, then the fourth thing is to whistleblow. Now, many organizations are actually setting up whistleblowing now. The NHS, for example, they've established a whistleblowing hotline, and that's a massive organization. I mean, honestly, any company worth its salt that's investing in culture, if you're doing all of the right things, you don't need a whistleblowing mechanism. Netflix don't have one because they have a constant feedback culture. And they're really good at giving each other feedback because they train their managers how to be managers. Who knew that would work? Whistleblow. If you're going to go to the media, think really, really, really carefully about how you're going to do it from a reputation perspective. It's something that I talk about in the book, in Detox Your Culture, the things that you really do need to think about if you're going to go, because you can bring unwanted attention on yourself. However, having said that, sometimes people feel that they've got no option. They've just simply got no option but to do something like that. And then the last thing that you can do is kind of build a support network. People who will listen to understand, not to respond. You know, people aren't listening properly when they go, I know, me too. They just can't wait to talk about themselves. Listening to understand is really all about, kind of them switching their ears on, hearing how it's affecting you. And then if you want advice, providing something in a real timely way that helps you to take action. What you don't want is a big moan fest. That's not going to help you. That's you being the worst of you. And you don't want that. But, having people that you can talk to is definitely a benefit. It will help with those feelings of stress, anxiety. Talk to a professional if you feel in any way, shape, or form out of control, if you're losing sleep, and if you can afford it, please invest in professional help. Lots of organizations offer EAP, employee assistance programs. Please take those up. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength that you're actually, taking the time to talk to somebody else. And you know what? If you feel that you can't talk to anyone, message me. I don't want you to feel like you're alone. So please just send me a message, and I'll provide you with some hope and a willing ear, because no one ever should be afraid to go to work. Okay, that's today's session. Hope you enjoyed it. Catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. If you'd like to find out more about how I can help you transform the culture of your team, head to my website at www.colindellis.com.